Hello, and welcome to episode 108 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. Today's tip comes to us from special guest, David Erickson.
Well, I will give you two. This is what I tell myself. I think most people who are new to public speaking, the biggest thing that they worry about is screwing up. They're afraid of screwing up, and that's an obviously natural thing. That's why people are terrified of public speaking. They don't want to be embarrassed in front of a crowd. But even as much public speaking as I do, I still get the nerves, get butterflies before I speak. So before I speak, I tell myself two things. One, you're I've covered. I've been prepared for this. I've gone over everything. I know what I'm talking about. If there's a question that comes out of left field, I likely, if I don't have the answer, will have an informed opinion about it or be able to point somebody in the right direction. So I know my content. I know my subject matter. And two, the other thing I say is people think about themselves 95% of the time. They think about themselves 95% of the time. So if I screw up, nobody's likely to remember it except for me.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from David Erickson. Welcome back. A lot of speaking that many mid-career professionals do is in a conference room or in another small space. It might be pitching a potential client, reporting on an initiative, or briefing our own team. The core of it all is still the same, though. It's about knowing what you want to accomplish, preparing, and establishing a connection with the folks in your audience. One of the valuable lessons to come out of today's episode is the importance of establishing that in-person connection, that analog relationship with your audience, especially when you are selling modern products like B2B marketing services. And that's what David Erickson, today's guest, specializes in. I talked a few months back about the importance of balancing logos, pathos, and ethos on. That was actually back in episode 35. To put it more simply, David reminds us that people like to do business with people they know, like, and trust. Establishing credibility and building relationship with your audience is just as important as making those logical points. David Erickson is a digital marketing veteran, a principal of eStrategy Media, and producer and co-host of the Beyond Social Media show. He's a frequent expert source for media coverage of digital marketing topics, having appeared on MSNBC and CBS and cited in such publications as USA Today, U.S. News and World Report, Slate, and Search Engine Watch. Now, let's meet David. David, thanks so much for joining us on 2-Minute Talk Tips this week.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's great that we're able to connect and fight through some of the audio connection issues that sort of plague our industry. But we're here now. And what I'd like to do is start off by hearing, your earliest memory of speaking in front of groups.
I had my misspent youth playing in bands, as a lot of boys do, right? And that was probably, though I was singing. I sang and played guitar, though I was singing. That was my first kind of quasi-public speaking experience. But I think the experience, in retrospect, both gave me the confidence to do public speaking and helped me in being good at it. Because what it really taught me, I wrote lyrics as well. And when you're writing lyrics, you're trying to fit the words into the music. And so you learn phrasing. And phrasing really helps a great deal in public speaking, knowing how to stretch words out, how to pause in between words for dramatic effect. So that's one thing that I think I learned from my earliest public speaking, quote unquote, experiences.
That's one of those things too, where, that's not only from fantastic early training, but the folks who were performing in bands and playing guitar and singing tended to have a much easier dating life than the folks who were just on the speech and debate team.
Yeah, and it kind of drops off when you stop playing. It was interesting though, but I mentioned that it gave me the confidence to believe I could do public speaking. But my actual first public speaking memory was me being terrified, actually twice. I took a video production class out of college, and I volunteered to be the first person being interviewed in our testing, or in our practicing in the class. I was all confident and everything, and once the red light went on, I just started laughing because I was so nervous. I could not complete it. I was just nervous, and all I did was laugh, and so that I just got scared, and that happens. Another time I was doing a radio interview and got a question from the interviewer that I was not prepared for. And on radio, you're fully conscious of the silence. And so I did not know what to say. And so therefore I didn't say anything. And then the silence drew out, and I felt more and more pressure. I got scareder and scareder. I got out of it. But what that taught me is that you survive the blunders. So.
And, what's interesting is one of the most powerful things a speaker can do, I believe, is to be comfortable with silence, to be able to let a point just linger.
Exactly. I do public relations, and one of the training things that we do with clients for media training, teach them one of the tricks that reporters will do to get you to say more things is to not talk, is to just stop and let the silence build. And people have a natural inclination to fill that silence, so they start talking again. But yeah, being comfortable with the silence is a great skill to have as a public speaker. I agree.
Absolutely. I've done that on a number of my shows. And what's really interesting too is that when you stay silent and somebody stops speaking and they start speaking again, obviously with the media, they're often hoping to get the real dirt. But what I found is in other interviews, that's really where folks start opening up and start sharing some additional things as they just try to fill it.
Yeah.
How did you get past that initial nervousness?
Practice. I mean, really, just one of my first jobs out of college was a corporate job, and I knew that everybody said you needed public speaking experience. It's a skill that you should obtain. So I joined the Toastmasters, right? And the one thing I don't know that I learned a lot about public speaking from Toastmasters per se, but it gave you a space to practice speaking in front of a group and being able to make mistakes and everything, but getting acclimated to speaking in front of a group. But just the more you do it, the better you get at it. It's like anything.
Absolutely. There's really no substitute for stage time. The other thing that I think is really interesting too is going back to where you talked about starting with music and writing songs and having to manage that phrasing with the music, with the rhythm of the music and the melody and tying all of that together. It's really one of those, some of that early foundation in training that your message and the story you're trying to tell is about so much more than just the words you happen to speak.
It is. It's the message you're trying to convey, coupled with really stage presence. One thing I enjoy public speaking now. I've gotten over the fear of it, and I enjoy what I'm talking about. I enjoy the topics that I discuss in public speaking. That enjoyment comes across in your stage presence, and people recognize that you're enjoying yourself, and it makes them. It makes the experience of the presentation or the speech enjoyable for the audience, because they can see that you are having a good time. The other thing that my music experience helped me with is having an ear. Obviously, music, you listen to it. If you're creating it, you pay special attention to it. But having the ear for the musicality of language, I have listened to podcasts. I have watched public speakers who clearly know exactly what they're talking about. They are experts in their field. They know exactly what they're talking about, but their voice is monotone, and you just cannot listen to it. It's impossible to listen to it because there's no modulation in their voice. It's all flatline, and it sounds like they're bored because their voice is flatline. It's not intentional. They clearly like what they're talking about, but they just haven't learned the trick of modulating their voice yet.
Right. You may as well be reading it off a piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly.
So as you've you've gotten over it, and you're doing more and more of these talks and talking about stuff that you're passionate about. What are you doing in sort of that 5 minutes before you get on stage?
So this is greet the audience. Everybody, all the stuff that you read about public speaking, everybody mentions greeting the audience. I get there early to get my technical issues out of the way because there's usually something that pops up. So making sure all the technology works, getting the presentation, if I'm using the presentation, set up and displaying. And then I leave enough time to make sure that I'm there to be able to greet people as they come in and ask them what they want to get out of the presentation, out of the discussion, thank them for coming. That warms up your audience before you actually go on. You already have a sympathetic audience simply by virtue of you being the speaker. Most people are terrified of public speaking, so there's an empathy and a built-in sympathy that the audience already has for you. But then building on that and meeting people face-to-face, one-on-one builds a personal connection where your audience is going to be more warm to you from the beginning.
That's awesome. And the other thing I like about that is that it sort of distracts you from yourself, because a lot of the times the nerves we're dealing with, it's just stuff spiraling in your head. And if you can just get out of your own head and do something else, it doesn't give you time to be as nervous.
Exactly. Keeping your mind occupied with other people's questions or other people's discussions is a good way to keep that from building. Exactly.
Obviously, speaking is a large part of your business as a digital marketing consultant, mm-hmm. where, I mean, you help a lot of different brands and a lot of different companies succeed online, and you've got quite a pedigree there. But what exactly do you do with them? How does the help you provide these organizations manifest?
Sure. So it can play out in many different ways. It depends on the client. It can go from a smaller client who does not understand, so we do digital marketing, public relations, advertising, who does not understand that. And most small business people want to do their business because they're passionate about their business and they're not marketers. And so they don't understand a lot of this stuff and they need help. So taking them through the process of identifying who their audience is. A lot of times they'll say it's everyone. Well, that's not very helpful in terms of marketing. You need to narrow down who your ideal target audience is, who you want to you need to sell to. So helping them identify that, helping them understand what those people need from you as a business. And we do content marketing, so understanding who those target audiences need in terms of content to attract them to you and help them create content, promote the content, do the advertising, do the measurement of the content to make sure that we're successful. So it can run the gamut from a complete program to just doing little bits and pieces of it. So I've done video advertising campaigns for the large client. Typically, you're doing a little project for them rather than everything. They've got in-house marketers who've built their strategy already. They know who their target audience is, but they need help with their particular part of the project. So it might be building a website, might be doing search engine advertising, search engine optimization, video advertising, what have you.
Business digital marketing it's about so much more than just opening up an Instagram account for your store.
It absolutely is. The trap that small businesses often fall into is they think that they can, as a small business person, I understand this, you think you can do everything yourself and you don't want to give control away to other people because you think you've got to have it. But
or your teenager at college could do it for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So you try something out and it doesn't work and you figure, well, that just didn't work and that's no good. But maybe you didn't understand it fully enough, like search engine advertising, for example. That's a classic example. People try it out. They buy a bunch of keywords on Google and don't get any traffic, or get some traffic, but it doesn't convert. But they don't understand the sophistication of the medium and haven't implemented it correctly. And if they had, it could have worked very well for them, but their first try at it didn't work, so they figure it doesn't work.
One of the things I found with social media and podcasting as well is that one of the great things about these tools is that they are so cheap and easy to get started with. One of the biggest problems with these tools is that they are so cheap and easy to get started with.
So I've started it. Now what do I do? I have been to many conferences where early on with social media, the great thing about it is it's free. Well, yeah, but there's the labor cost, there's the experience cost, there's the insight cost that you're not considering. So nothing good in life is free, right?
Right. Exactly. So how does your speaking play a role in this?
It plays a major role new business generation. I need to scare up business. Responding to RFPs is one way that you do it, and you get called in for a meeting and you do your pitch. So we build a presentation deck about what our ideas are for a particular business and walk them through it. That's public speaking. That's a form of public speaking. It's a controlled, usually a handful of people in the room. And so the important aspects of that are building your presentation, building your story for how you're going to help this business succeed, but also then being able to read the room as you're talking, understanding how people are reacting to what you're saying and whether they're having concerns or whether they're really excited, reading the room and understanding those emotions are going through and what the power dynamics among the people you're talking to are, and being able to respond to that appropriately. So that's one aspect of it. A lot of it is...
and that's probably the public speaking that the vast majority of people working for organizations are going to be doing.
Right. So it's an incredible skill to have, and it's one that takes a while. I mean, I'm pretty good at it now, but it took me a long time to learn how to do that. So it takes a lot of experience to do it. And if you're lucky, you are coupled with somebody who's got a lot of experiences and is good at it, and you can learn from them. You know, I kind of learned a lot of it, made a lot of my mistakes at the beginning as a solopreneur, and didn't have anybody to learn from. So I kind of failed a lot to learn how to do it.
One of the things they say on the Manager Tools podcast a lot is good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. It's absolutely true, too.
So you mentioned reading the power dynamics in the room. Could you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Sure. So who reports to whom, understanding who is the ultimate influencer, who is a secondary influencer of the person who's going to be making the decision, what they're likely, just what their body language is toward one another, what toes you may be stepping on by walking into this group. I've done website design work, plenty of redesign works plenty of times, and sometimes you will have the person who did the original design in the room, and they may be defensive because there needs to be a redesign. It might not be their fault, but they may take it that way, that, well, what's so wrong with my design? It's just that it needs to be updated. But there's a dynamic in there that could affect whether or not you get the business.
Right, and a lot of those decisions are going to be made after you've left the room.
Yeah. Exactly. And so reading that dynamic and being able to build rapport with each of those people in the room. I mean, a lot of this is people assume that you have the experience and the knowledge to complete what they need you to do. But then there's the soft part of it, whether are they going to enjoy working with you? Do they like you? I mean, basically it's know, like, and trust, right?
Right.
So that's part of the reading the power dynamic too, is getting those vibes and being able to read them and respond to them to put people at ease and create that trust.
And that's one of those things that is so important in sales as well. Is that in retail and consumer sales, it's a lot more obvious, but it applies in business sales as well, is that nobody buys anything because they need it. They buy something because they want it. Exactly.
They buy something because they want it, because they want to, they need to solve a problem, but they want to solve the problem because that's how they're going to advance in their job. They want the problem solved because they don't want to look like a fool. Right. It's an emotional reaction that has to do with them primarily.
And a paper-based RFP response will give them all the logical reasons, but it's that personal connection that gives them that want, that this is the solution they want instead of a competitor's solution.
Right. And if you're the person who's in charge of the RFP process within a company, You put out your RFP, you bring in the people, and if you bring in my team, and my team hits it off with everybody and has all the right answers, and is obviously the solution to what they're trying to solve, then that person who runs the RFP process is by definition a rock star because they brought in the right talent. Right. So within their own organization, they have built their own reputation and prestige.
So we've talked about podcasts and social media. You have a podcast called Beyond Social Media. What is that show about?
I do. So this is, we call it a fast-paced weekly podcast covering the best and the worst of digital marketing, public relations, advertising, strategic communications. We talk about what's in the news in regard to those industries and comment on that. We discuss some cool marketing tools that we've discovered or tried out, and wrap it up with some marketing data or marketing statistics or reports that are of interest. So been doing that for since 2013, I think, and we're on our 253rd podcast.
Wow, that's an impressive volume.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to launch it?
We started it with a friend of mine who brought me and him and a woman in New York, B.L. Ackman, together to do it just because we wanted to do it. For no other reason. I do things often just to know how to do them. And so my motivation personally was to learn how to do a full-fledged podcast. I had done some podcasting at a previous agency, but I didn't do the producing of it and didn't do all the things surrounding it. I just was kind of the commentator. So that was my motivation, just to learn everything about it. But also because it's a weekly podcast, it gives me discipline to stay on top of what's going on in digital marketing by tracking all the stuff we will be talking about during the show. So that was my primary motivation for doing it.
It's amazing how much those tools, doing an activity just gives you those other things. In this case, in your case, obviously forcing you to stay on top of all these different trends and different things and look for different things in the news. One of the things I found by doing this show is that while I was always a very good speaker, I didn't necessarily understand why until I started doing the show and started pulling all of this stuff apart and talking to other folks. And then you can start to see the insides of, okay, this works. Now I understand why this works.
Well, exactly. And it has, as a digital marketer, it's something that as a growing medium, I wanted to do it to learn how to do it, but I'm also wanted to learn how to do it so that I could provide that expertise to others as part of my digital marketing practice. So, the podcasting, audio marketing, I think, is the next frontier in content marketing. When you look at all the trends that are converging, the audio is going in your car, it's on your phone, it's everywhere, it's easy to consume, and now we're starting to see channels open up for podcasting. Spotify inviting podcasts in, Pandora. Google is working on measurement metrics, sorely needed measurement metrics for podcasting, and they're indexing audio now. So we're going to start seeing audio show up in search results and through your Google Home, through your speakers, through your Amazon Echo.
So, when you mentioned that audio marketing is becoming more of a thing, I assume you're talking about more than, the Audible ads and the Blue Apron ads and the MeUndies and all that other stuff. So what do you see as sort of the future of audio marketing?
A lot of it has to do, I think, with podcasting. That's a foundation. So one of the things I advise some clients for, if they likely have the capacity and the commitment to do it, is to do a podcast. As a business marketing tool, it's a great choice, but you need to give it time to succeed. So podcasting is one of them, because people want content that they can consume easily, whether they're listening to it while they're in the kitchen making dinner or on their commute to and from work or jogging after work. It's the easiest way to consume content. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is I got my start doing website design, website development, and as a result, search engine optimization. So I've been doing search engine optimization since like Yahoo was a directory. And so along the way, I've learned all different aspects of search optimization. And now we're starting to see the optimization of content that is being read through voice-activated devices and through smart speakers. So if you take a look at how Google Home works, is you can ask very complex questions of Google Home, and it will be likely know the answer to them because it has the whole web at its disposal. Google has been crawling the web since 1998, and there's voice translation, text-to-voice translation software or programs are so sophisticated that they're able to read what's online and answer the question you asked your smart speaker. So that's another important aspect of audio marketing, is the optimization of text content for audio. And now Google's working on indexing audio directly, extracting content from audio files specifically. And so podcasting, when they get this figured out, and probably they will soon, the content of podcasts will become much more widely available than they are right now.
Wow. It's kind of amazing what's been happening with AI on that front. One of the things I've been doing is experimenting a little bit with Microsoft's presentation translator tool, where what it does is it connects to the cloud, and while you're speaking, it can provide live subtitles on top of your slide deck.
Wow.
By doing voice recognition. And it could also translate that into multiple languages, including Klingon, of course. And so you can start your presentation with a QR code. Folks can scan it with their phone and follow along with subtitles in their own languages.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I did not know about that. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's an add-in for PowerPoint. It's really cool. And one of the things I've been starting to do is then try feeding podcast episodes back into the PC and having it do this to produce a transcript that I can then post.
Nice.
And when you look at doing it at the enterprise level and at the bigger level, we're a lot closer to Google and Bing and everybody else just doing that for all the audio stuff on the web.
Right. Yep. No, thank you for that. I'm definitely going to try that out, because transcripts are the bane of my existence. And the thing with audio is some technologies, it takes forever for them to figure out, and then it feels like overnight they become fantastic. Remember when you had to train Microsoft Word to understand your voice?
Yeah, and now I have conversations with the Echo. So what do you think is the most important lesson that small businesses can learn about digital marketing?
Seek out expertise, because there's so much to know that you can't possibly know it all. And there's plenty of stuff online. There's a lot of smart people who are sharing a lot of good content online. So learn about it, and then look for practitioners who have the expertise and experience you need, and let them do it. Presumably you want to run your business because you want to run your business and not market it. That's the way most small business owners are. But you need to know what you don't know. So learn a little bit and then seek out the expertise.
And how does your podcast support your business and speaking today?
It doesn't really. It supports me in giving me the framework and the discipline to stay on top of everything I need to stay on top of. It helps me with my public speaking. I do a podcast every week, so I have to talk, and we do it live. So we don't really edit anything, so it keeps me on top of that. It's marketing, so there's that, but it doesn't directly, not that I've been able to tell, bring me any business.
One of the most amazing things about digital marketing is just how much more we can actually demonstrate ROI than we have been able to do in the past. And it's still always so difficult to show that this action led to this revenue.
It is. And, I didn't set out to do my podcast as a way to earn business. What it does do, though, is demonstrate my knowledge and expertise and everything. So people who listen to my podcast are going to be able to tell that I know what I'm talking about for the most part. So in terms of building the trust aspect of what you need to accomplish in order to win business, it does help that way.
That's awesome. So if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
You can find my podcast at BeyondSocialMediaShow.com. I'm on Twitter at @DErickson. And my company is eStrategy Media. It's e-strategymedia.com.
Awesome. And we'll also have all of those links over at 2minutetalktips.com/David. So David, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week. This has been great.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation.
I like how this discussion took an almost meta perspective to speaking, as we discussed things like musicality, power dynamics, and the why behind David's podcast. And of course, the ultimate goals of many SMB owners looking into digital marketing services. David and I recorded our conversation in January of 2019, and it's now early April 2019. One of the things David predicted at that time when we recorded was how Google would probably start searching and transcribing audio content in the near future. It turns out he was right. Within the past couple of weeks, news has come out about how Google is making transcripts of some podcasts, presumably to make them more searchable and to surface that content to other internet users. There's some questions about how this impacts copyrights and intellectual property, as well as some potential liability questions regarding incorrect transcripts, and I expect those conversations will continue for some time. Quite frankly, I'm just thrilled that Google may help make this show more accessible to a wider audience. It's also helpful to note that YouTube, of course another Google property, has been converting audio to text for years as they do automatic closed captioning for videos. In fact, the main reason I publish this podcast to YouTube is to take advantage of this feature so folks with hearing challenges can still follow along with the content. Granted, it's not good enough yet, but it will get there. You can take a look here at 2minutetalktips.com/YouTube. And of course, Microsoft has been doing some pretty impressive work with audio to text conversion as well. Speakers ought to familiarize themselves with the free PowerPoint add-in Presentation Translator. I talked about this back in episode 65, and I'll likely revisit it in a couple of months since almost a year has passed. On a related note, Microsoft has also started offering automatic closed captioning in Skype. You can enable it in the settings. It even supports live translation into dozens of languages. This opens tremendous opportunities for greater communication across ability, cultural, and language barriers. My experience is that the English captions for English speech works well, but it adds a bit of latency to the conversation, so it's not something I use by default. But the fact that it works at all is kind of amazing. And the fact that I can now have Skype phone conversations with folks that don't speak English is a huge benefit to our world. So, what are your thoughts on this week's episode and the advances in audio to text conversion? Let us know in the comments over at 2minutetalktips.com/David. Learn more about David's business or find the Beyond Social Media podcast by checking out the links over at 2minutetalktips.com/David. Share this episode with a friend, colleague, or relative by giving them the link, you guessed it, 2minutetalktips.com/David. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.